Hello, everybody. Welcome to our latest edition of Art Talks. My name is Deborah Rosinski. I'm Executive Director of Bainbridge Arts and Crafts, and it's my pleasure today to be here with Naomi Spinak, who is a force to reckon with, who has been behind putting together the Bainbridge Island Fashion Show for a number of years, and instigated and got grant funding for a whole conference that we will ask her about, and also an exhibition that we're going to be having on view here at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts called ReFashion. So Naomi, thank you so much for talking with us today. And maybe we can start with having you talk a little about how you came to thinking about repurposing of materials and combining that with your background in theater and clothing in general.
Sure. I've been around fabric and textiles forever because my mother is a sewer, and my mother was always in love with fabrics, and she always wanted to teach us about fabric, and there was always fabric everywhere around us in our house. And she took me to New York, to the garment district, and there was a wonderful fabric store in Maryland where I grew up called G Street Fabrics, which doesn't exist anymore. But she would go there on field trips frequently. So I was surrounded by fabric. I ended up studying textiles and studying costume design in college. And as a costume designer, especially for nonprofit theaters, you're always asked to reuse things. You don't usually, until you get to Broadway level budgets, you never have a budget big enough to source everything new. So between studying the history of clothing and having to reuse things and remake things already, I was sort of already very aware of remaking clothing and reusing textiles for different purposes. And then I was doing a whole bunch of different things as I was getting into a career and kids and family. And I was making children's clothing just to sell at craft fairs and things like that on Etsy. And I went to this exhibit that the Costume Society of America, which I was a member of, was giving in Davis, California. And it was all about repurposing. And it was about what was happening in the textile world, which you don't really know if you're not really involved in it, which was so many things were creating an environmental problem with the production of garments and the production of textiles. And this exhibit talked a lot about that. And I decided I wanted to get more involved in reuse and in organic fibers and thinking about textiles in a different way. And then a few years ago, I was doing that kind of thing, and I was patching and remaking things. I got approached by Zero Waste Bainbridge, and they were doing an Earth Art Month. And they were talking about doing a ReFashion, a trashion show, because that had been done in several other places. And they wanted to do that as an environmental awareness event and get people who might not be involved in some of the other Earth Month events to come to a fashion show. So I started working on that. And then I kept working on that. And I sort of went in and out. I've been running it with a partner and with a committee for the past 6 or so years. And one year I didn't chair it, but I was designing a whole show at the Bainbridge Performing Arts that was all repurposed clothing at the time. So I had to bow out of running the show, but then we had our costumes do a little performance with the actors there at the show after all. So I was involved still, just not running it.
Well, that's great. That's amazing to hear how it's kind of evolved over time. And I know one big difference with the show that we're having in the gallery here in April is that the clothing that's going to be on view is intended to be wearable and reproducible. And the trashion show, it's more kind of one of a kind, not necessarily practical to wear, but inventive, I guess is how I would frame it. You might choose other descriptions in addition.
Yeah, well, part of what we started to think about this year is that we had our show last year and we had a lot of fun, and we've always had fun with our show, but we realized that we're kind of repeating ourselves, that we're having a lot of garments that were made for the show, but not rewearable. And that we felt like we needed to go deeper and try to give more concrete examples of how people can use fibers in their daily lives, and not just for just a one of kind of time. So we're working towards changing the show itself to include garments that can be worn also, because we've seen plastic garments and we've seen those things happen, and we feel like we need to move on from that.
Well, we're excited to see all these fabulous pieces, and maybe would you want to share a little about some of the artists who are going to be in the show?
Yeah, we have an amazing group of artists. We have Janelle Abbott, who had some work in a gallery before, and she has a background in fashion and grew up with her parents having a fashion company. And she is very prolific and made all sorts of scrap kind of clothing, which is really fun and bright colored. And then we have Susan Skalick, who used to own Astor's, and she left Astor's to start on a new journey with the local fiber shed. So she's been meeting and talking with a lot of people raising fiber in this area and trying to produce fiber more locally and more sustainably and thoughtfully. And she's doing a lot of remade clothing too. We try to emphasize menswear in this particular show because we find that's a little bit hard to find menswear that thinks about this kind of thing. Men wear clothes just the same as women do, but it doesn't seem to be that there's a lot of companies focusing on making menswear more thoughtful and sustainable. I read a statistics in one of the books that talks about the changes that have happened in fashion in the past 20, 30 years. And men's dress shirts, men's button-down shirts made in factories in China, it takes about 7 minutes for a factory to make a men's button-down shirt because of the way they've made all the parts so much factory efficient. And so they made people into technology. They made people into factory parts pretty much to make them make these things so quickly, because machines can't do all the parts. And I just thought that it's good to stop and think about those things and look at where our clothing is coming from. So we have a lot of really interesting artists who've engaged with textiles in slightly different ways. And I think it's going to be really fun to see what they've come up with.
You use the term fiber shed. Can you explain that a little bit further?
Sure. We have a watershed, which is the water, all the different kinds of water sources that are around where we live and the places where people settle. And so people are starting to use that term for textiles as well, for where are your fibers, the fibers that make up not just your clothing, but your sheets and your towels and your tablecloths. Where are the fibers coming from? Because things used to be made in this country, and as most of us know, that cotton is still raised in this country, a lot of cotton, but a lot of things are not made in this country, and people are not used to living around where their textiles are made anymore. People don't know where their textiles come from. If you pick up a random piece of clothing, do you know where it came from, where it was made, or where the textiles that make it up are from? Most people don't. And things aren't made locally hardly at all. So people are starting to work on that, especially alpaca and sheep, things that get farmed, animals that get farmed around here and can be made into wool. And then flax, linen is something that used to be grown and is much harder to find locally now, and much harder to find in general. And so people are working on bringing back those manufacturing ways and seeing if we can do it more around here. I mean, we have farmland around here. We have people raising animals and people raising them for fiber. So it's just a question of getting that production back happening. So some of that's happening. So it's pretty exciting. There's a book, actually, I have it here about, this is a woman in California, Rebecca Burgess, but she writes a lot about looking for her local fiber shed and bringing back local fibers and how to do that.
And the conference you've been working on goes into this in depth. Can you talk a bit about what's planned for that conference?
Sure. The conference is March 27th at Islandwood. It's from 1 to 5 and it's open to everyone. And it's talking about some of these things we've been talking about finding out where our textiles are from and what goes into making them, because it's extracting a huge toll on the environment, the way that we're not thinking about our textiles and not thinking about the cost of how many garments we buy. We buy now a huge amount more than even 30 years ago. There's some statistic that even in the 1960s, people bought maybe 10, 12 garments a year. And now we buy something like 80 garments a year on an individual basis. And we don't wear them as long. They don't last as long. They're not made as well. So it's, there's a lot of issues that go into this. There's a lot of human labor issues that go into who is making our clothing and our textiles. There's a lot of chemical issues, things that are being put in our garments and in our textiles and the dyes. And so we're going to talk about a lot of that at the conference. And one of the things I'm excited about, we have 3 keynote speakers. And the first one is Matthew Isaac from Seattle University. And he's going to talk about how did we start buying so much? Why do we start buying so much? Because we're being marketed to that way. And that's on purpose. Companies have marketed so much more now. We get so many more ads than we used to get. We're encouraged to shop so much more, to shop for every single holiday, Labor Day holiday, Mother's Day, Secretary's Day, just keep buying stuff. And why? Why do we do that? And so he's going to talk about over acquisition, actually. We think about overconsumption, but it's not necessarily that we're consuming these things, it's that we're just acquiring them, we're collecting them. And then we're going to have Lena Lipsky. She is from Olympic Yarn and Fiber, and she is doing a lot of local fiber production. So she's going to talk about our fiber shed and how we're bringing back some fiber production to Washington. And then we're going to have a great speaker, which is Stacy Flynn from Evernew, which is a company working on recycling fibers that couldn't be easily recycled before. So it's a company that doesn't market to consumers, because what they're doing is making this fiber and selling it to clothing companies to make textiles out of recycled fibers instead of new fibers. And then we're gonna have a lot of workshops on fixing clothes and how you can deal with a stain without tossing your clothes and what happens in the secondhand market. And I'm giving a talk on just looking through your closet and how you decide even that you need something new. Because I think that part of what we do is we shop without even knowing what we're buying or knowing why we're buying it. So we're having a lot of fun workshops and interesting workshops. We're having Paige St. Pierre, who was one of the winners of the Trash and Show last summer when we did it on Hilltop, and she's going to give a mending workshop. Just simple things that pretty much anyone can do. If you can hold a needle and thread it, then you should be able to do some simple fixes that will keep your clothing in your closet longer and keep people from throwing things in the landfill. So we're pretty excited about that.
Tell me a little more about your own kind of sewing life, maybe the children's clothes that you've made. And I was looking through some of your background, and I liked the name you had for the clothing company, and I'm forgetting it now.
It was Free Range Kids Clothes.
Yeah, I love that.
I was starting out because when I was making clothes, which was before I even had children, I was just noticing that we were really having strong gender attachments to colors. And, boys had to wear certain colors and girls had to wear certain colors. And I wanted to have kids' clothing that didn't have to follow those same guidelines that were not really guidelines. It's just, and it's interesting actually being a historian, seeing that those things are very recent, that Victorians didn't dress their boys in blue and their girls in pink. In fact, blue was considered a gentle, muted color, and girls were more likely to be dressed in blue, probably until after the World War II. And so I wanted to make things bright colors. So I made a lot of yellow and red and blue clothes that were bright colors and were not supposed to be gender specific. And then when I had my own son, he really at some point wanted a pink shirt. and it was hard to find a pink shirt for a little boy. And I ended up making him a pink shirt. And, you know, we talked about the fact that we didn't think anybody got to have the, you know, limit their colors based on their gender, that wasn't, and now you can see that gender fluidity is a lot more accepted now, and people are putting a lot less sway into what colors boys and girls can wear and what that means about who they are. So I think that's good. But that's the clothing I was making back then. And then I wasn't really staying with the children's clothing very much. And so I would kind of segued into some other things. I did a bunch of activist art in other ways, but I always have been reusing and trying to think about where the textiles came from and what's going into them, and doing things a little bit differently than the way I've seen them done before. I've done a lot of quilting and not just use quilting cottons. I've kind of broken the rules a bit in textile and fiber art, but I always have fun with it.
I think the rules are meant to be broken. They're, you know, suggestions perhaps that you don't have to stick with. What kind of arts activism did you get involved in? Were there specific things going on in the world that you responded to?
Yeah, well, I did a lot of work on gun violence with most of my work in the past few years. I made a giant flag that I worked on the barn a lot, and I think it's up in the barn now. Still, it's up in the barn. It went on various journeys. Right before the pandemic shut down most things, I had an exhibit at Harvard in their Common Center with a couple of other female artists who are also doing work on gun violence. We had gotten started together in Texas. Actually, we opened an exhibit at the opening of the Texas State Legislature a few years ago. I think it was 2018, to talk about gun violence, because although Texas is thought of as a very pro-gun state, the capital's in Austin, which is not a pro-gun area, and they were willing, actually Texas Capitol has a space for artists to engage with issues. And so we had this availability, and my friend from Texas, from Austin, Lalena, she had a piece that was responding to the students at Parkland who had spoke up a lot against the violence, the massacre that happened at their school. And so we were all engaging with that sort of issue that was happening, and that is still happening. And I ended up making a number of other quilts. That big quilt that I made was a giant flag, and it has the names hand embroidered of about a lot of the people who died in mass murders through gun violence in this country over the past 20 years. And then I continued making quilts with names. I made one after the Pittsburgh shooter at the Tree of Life, and that quilt is there now. Actually, I made one after the shooting in Florida at the nightclub, the Pulse one, and that flag is there. They're having a museum that they're building to memorialize the people who died there. So I was doing a lot of hand embroidering of names of people who died through gun violence, and trying to get people to talk about that more and what we were doing about it. And I'd like to make more work along those lines, but I've sort of segued during the pandemic and worked on different things at different times. So I still have a lot of work to work on that I haven't finished, that I have in my head and in my sketchbooks, but I'll just keep working on it, hopefully.
Well, it's inspiring that all this work that you've been involved in, all these variety of ways as an artist and as a curator and as an organizer. And I mean, it's all connected.
I was thinking about this, the fact that the fashion art is not really that connected to the gun art, although it is still in fiber, but that I started in this conceptual art program in high school. And I think that just kind of informed all my artwork that I've done ever since, is that there's always a message behind it that I've been encouraged to think about looking at the world around me when I'm creating art. Mm-hmm. And so that seems to be the connection that I hardly ever seem to make art just because it's pretty. Well, I just hope we get people out looking at things and being involved in in with each other again, because I think that's a struggle right now, is people have gotten so used to being in their homes and not going out. And hopefully it's safer now and people can start to re-engage. I just think it's really important to have a community talking about these things, because especially as we're looking at all these textiles that we've bought and all these textiles that we throw away, that we just think about why we do that. And everyone talks about being busy and everyone talks about being overburdened, but when it comes to these kind of issues, what we can do is less. We can do less shopping and we can own fewer things. And I know there's this movement to minimalize, but I don't think we can just throw things out, because then there's still things that are piling up and polluting our water and taking up resources. So I'm looking forward to more community conversations about these things and what we can do to change them and improve them, because I don't think it's the way that things have to be.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for talking about all of this and all the great work you're doing, and all the organizations you're partnering with and artists you're working with. And we appreciate working with you on these wonderful ideas and the exhibition, and getting to know you better through the process.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be working with such a great group of people, and I keep trying to bring more people in and get more people to have their art out there and get more people involved. So I'm excited that that's happening.
Be sure to stop by the Bainbridge Arts and Crafts Gallery to visit ReFashion, new exhibition on view from April 1st through May 1st, 2022.